Hi everybody, welcome to my video. Thank you for joining me today. My name's Rebecca Jarman and I'm going to teach you how to paint this super fun Christmas themed, specifically for beginners, watercolour tutorial on how to paint this Christmas tree on a car. How sweet is that? I also tell you how to create this background with salt. So it's a salt resist technique. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, so I go through everything that you need to do to create that effect successfully in this particular class. So gather all your materials and let's get started. Hi everybody and welcome to my video. If you're new here, my name's Rebecca Jarman and we're going to be painting today a Christmas themed car with a sweet little Christmas tree on the top. I'm going to take you through all the materials you'll need for today's class. First of all, the paint colours that I'm using are sap green, alizarin crimson and some Payne's grey. So we're going to use the Payne's grey in quite a liquid format, and then also much more concentrated as well. That will be for the wheels of the car, so much more diluted for the background. We're going to be using this fun salt technique to create areas that look like snow, so that's going to be really exciting to do. I look forward to that. So you will also need some table salt, ordinary table salt, nothing special about that whatsoever, but it does fantastic things, so that's super. I'm going to be using probably 3 brushes. I'm going to use a number 8, a number 4 and a number 2 round brush. The 8 will be for applying the background wash. I have already mixed up some paint in my palette, so this is the Payne's grey ready to go for the background. You will also need to grab yourself some paper towel to clean your brush. You need 2 pots of water. I always recommend 2 pots, one for washing your brush, and obviously that gets super dirty quick, and another pot that we keep clean purely for mixing our colours so we don't get any muddy colours there. Another thing I want to point out is that I like to take my paper down to a board just by using ordinary masking tape. That keeps the painting nice and flat, especially with this technique that we're going to do today. The background wash, we're going to be applying a lot of water, so if you use a piece of watercolour paper and don't stick it down, you'll find that you'll get this buckling effect happening and it'll spoil the finish of your painting. So stick it down to some kind of board, a drawing board, or like me, a piece of hardboard or reinforced cardboard, something like that, and it'll just help you along the way. It'll be much easier to create the technique that you want and get the best results. Now I just want to show you that I also have a PDF for you to download if you don't want to freehand draw your car and your tree, so you can grab that down in the description below. Just download it onto your computer and then print it off, and obviously use a trace technique to trace it down onto your paper. I am using a square format because I think this is going to look really fun being square, and it's going to be great as a Christmas card for you guys too. Before we get started, I just wanted to show you some of the other watercolour free tutorials that I've got on my channel specifically for beginners. So I have this one, which is It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year, and as you can see it's a pretty wreath with some berries. I also have another square formatted card, which are these 3 really cute Christmas trees, and we used a medium on the top of the trees to create that lovely glittery effect. That was really nice to do. And then I have these 2 sweet robins. And finally these 3 poinsettia flowers. That was really nice to create as well. So you'll find all those on my channel, and what I'm going to do is put together a playlist of all my Christmas themed paintings, so you'll be able to select that playlist and play all of those too. Now if you are new, if you press the like button, if you're enjoying my video, just give that a click. I'll be really pleased if you do that. That helps support my channel, helps me grow. And also if you learn something and you'd like to see more of my videos, click the subscribe button as well as the bell icon, and that way you'll get a notification each time I upload a new watercolour class for you. Super, so let's get started then, folks. So after you have downloaded my PDF and traced it down onto your paper, you need to take some, I'm using the Payne's Grey, but you could use black watered down, or you could use a neutral tint or something along those lines. And basically you want a nice big puddle in your palette. And what we're going to do, if I show you, it's nice and wet. Okay, there's a lot of fluid in this, and this is going to aid this salt technique to work. And what I'm going to do first of all is take another brush, because I've just dipped that in the paint and I don't want to waste it. Taking another brush quickly, and I'm just, as you can see here, just dipping it into my clean water. And what I'm going to get you guys to do first is wet the background, but please don't wet the tree or the car. And this is going to help to keep the surface area wet before we apply the salt. So if we don't do this, the paint will start to dry very quickly. We're in the winter, and you've probably, like me, got the heating on in your house, and the paint will want to dry really quickly as soon as you put it down onto dry paper, and you'll end up with lines, which we don't want. We want a nice wash of colour in the background. And also, if the paint dries, we won't be able to create the texture with the salt. We need to add the salt into wet paint. So this is really, really important, guys. So don't skip this step. Take the time to apply this water. You don't want great puddles of water. You just want the surface to be damp. So take care around the edges of your drawing. Okay, don't be too upset if the paint ends up going over your drawing slightly. It's not a massive disaster. We can actually sort that out afterwards, so don't panic. But as you can see already, the water, should I say, is drying at the top there where I applied it first. So I do know this is going to dry pretty quickly, and that's why I'm using quite a big brush to put this water down to the surface, so I can do it as quickly as I can. I'm just taking care along the edges here. Okay, if you look from a slight angle, you'll see if there's any areas you've missed. Just quickly put some water down there as well. And then immediately go to your grey that you've pre-mixed and start painting it down. So start at the top, do nice strokes left and right. We want a lovely coverage of this grey from top to bottom in the background. You can see how it wants to spread out into that water, which is just what we wanted. It likes to splay into the wet areas of the paper, but notice it won't splay into any areas that are dry. So our objects are safe. The paint and the water won't run into your objects if you haven't wet them. So it's a great way of controlling where your paint will flow. Okay, so I'm being nice and quick. Again, I'm using a big brush here. This is a number 8 brush. Honestly, the quicker you get this to paint down, the better for the technique, because you don't want that paint to start drying before you have a chance to put down the salt. So get this down super fast. Don't worry too much on the edges. If you get a little bit of paint, you know, goes onto your car or onto your tree, don't panic. We can lift that a little bit afterwards, so we can tidy up those edges afterwards. Don't panic. So I've got that all over my painting. There's a couple of bits of dust on there I can see, but not to worry. What I will suggest now though is you take your paper towel and you just wipe down the excess paint that's gone onto the tape. just try and remove that, because what the paper likes to do is it likes to suck that paint off the tape as it's drying, and you'll end up with blooms being created. Okay, so once you've got that down, having a little look, there's no puddles, so that's perfect. I'm going to quickly take my table salt here, and I'm going to take a pinch. Let me just show you how much salt I have in my hand here. So not an awful lot, and I'm going to put it in between my fingertips from a slight height. I'm going to just sprinkle that down into the paint all over the background there, and make sure there's some down the bottom as well. Okay, I might put a little bit more at the top here. Whoops, that was quite a lot, but there we go. Now, just with regard to this technique, guys, you never quite know what you're going to achieve. It can be a little bit hit and miss, but as long as your paint is slightly wet when you place the salt down, you should get a good result. So you can see there, you can see the grains of salt on the surface there. It's already started to suck up some of that paint. So I'm going to now leave this to completely dry, and we'll move on to the next step. Welcome back. Now that our painting is dry, we can see that the salt technique has really taken effect and given a great result. Don't worry if yours hasn't turned out quite like this. Like I said before, it can be a little bit hit and miss, and you might want to practice it a few times before you create your actual Christmas card. But if I just show you the sample here, sometimes you get larger marks created and sometimes you get smaller marks. Now that is very much dependent on how wet your paper is when you put the salt down. If you have some puddles, you'll tend to create marks like this. If you don't have puddles, you get these individual speckles. Okay, so let's move on. Now, as I said before, you may well have got a few areas where the paint seeped into some edges. That happens because we're working quite quickly to create the wash before we put the salt down. So, you know, don't beat yourself up about it if it's happened to you. Absolutely fine, we can rectify that. It's happened to me on the tree here and also on the bottom of the car here as well. You know, sometimes I just leave it and I'm happy with that, but I'm going to show you a technique to lift the paint and to clean up those edges. You will need a flat brush, preferably an acrylic brush, because the bristles tend to be a little bit firmer. And what we're going to do is damp the bristles down in clean water, guys, okay, so not your dirty water, make sure it's clean. And take your paper towel as well. You're going to need a clean paper towel for this. And what you're going to do is you're just going to run your bristles along the edge where the paint is, and then just press the paper towel down into that wet mark, and it will lift up the paint. And just continue doing that until you've removed it fully. It might take 2 or 3 attempts. It's a little bit down here on my bumper, so just use the bristles like a scrubbing brush if you like, and again just press down and remove that paint, and continue until you're happy with all your edges. So I'm just going to take a little bit off my tree here. Same again, just press down. Just when you're doing that, make sure you use a clean area of your paper towel each time, otherwise you're going to be pressing paint back down onto your paper where you don't want it. So just bear that in mind. Just clean up this bottom edge here. It lifts quite nicely because we've used quite a pale mix of paint, so it shouldn't be too difficult for you guys to do that. Now I'm happy, I can move on. So what I'm going to do now, guys, is take my number 4 round brush. So that's my medium round brush, if you like, size wise. I'm just going to reactivate this green paint here because it's had a chance to dry. So I'm just taking some clean water and popping it into that dry paint, and you'll see, look, it reactivates it really nicely, getting all around the edges there, because paint tends to gather in the edges of your palette, so you don't want to waste that by mixing more paint. Use it, actually get your bristles in there and you'll find that, look, it all comes back to life again really nicely. Okay, so make sure you've got enough paint there to cover your tree. And remember, I'm using my sap green, but you can use any green you have or mix a green yourself, which is great. I'm just speeding things up by using a paint that I already have. Just mix up a little more, I don't want to run out. Okay, and then I'm going to just take my brush and fill in the shape, starting at the edges and then dragging that paint across the surface. Now here, if you have a larger tree, if you're painting yours, if you've drawn yours a little bit bigger than me, this is really quite small, I can paint this in quite easily without getting hard lines. But if you're painting a larger area, try using a bigger brush, and also you can pre-wet the area like we did in the background, so you can use some clean water, pop some water down to wet that surface, and you'll have more time to paint this wash down before your paint starts to dry. So it just gives you that little bit of a window to make sure you don't get any hard lines as you're painting. So you just want a nice even wash across the tree. Then I'm going to quickly mix up some darker green just by taking more of the pigment into the mix, because I want a bit of texture on this tree. I don't want it to look flat like that. So the tree is still slightly damp. I'm just going to dab my brush down and create some sort of speckles, if you like, speckledy areas. So trees are really rough, aren't they? Lots of texture on them, and I just want to create some texture on there. Leave some of the lighter green coming through. And then obviously, because that paint's damp, the paper's damp should I say, so the paint that we're applying now wants to spread out into that damp paint, and it gives us some soft lines. Okay, if you happen to cover your tree entirely, and now it's all just one colour, now it's just a darker green than it was before, just take your paper towel and just lift off some areas. Just dab it to the surface and start lifting off. Just dab it down, screw up the paper towel so you get some random effects. Just dab it down and it'll remove some of that paint. Okay, alternatively just a damp brush will lift some of that paint away where you don't want it. Okay, so I'm quite happy that that's got a little bit of texture on now, and it's looking good. So I'm going to clean off my brush. The next thing we're going to look at is painting the car, and I'm going to use my crimson paint. So I'm switching my palette around for you guys so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, let's just check that that's in there. Yes, you can see that. So I'm taking a bit of my clean water, popping it down in the palette, and then I'm sort of mixing up some of that pigment, getting it onto my wet bristles and bringing it across into that water, that little puddle that I created. And that's going to be ample for painting this car. Before you start to paint your car, you want to make sure that this edge is totally dry, because if I put some red paint down now while it's damp, it's going to want to do as before, it's going to want to splay into that green, so we don't want that to happen. I want a nice crisp edge up there, so just give that chance to dry before you go ahead. I'm just going to give it a quick blast with my hairdryer. Just to make sure that that doesn't happen on my painting. Hairdryers are great to speed that process up. You know, I always tend to have one plugged in next to me while I'm doing these tutorials. I'm using the number 4 brush again, and I'm going to start off at the top of the vehicle, using the tip of my brush just to get that line in nice and crisp. And just bring that paint down from the top, drag it around those windows, And as you can see, my paint's nice and thick actually. There's a lot of pigment in it, so it's created a lovely vibrant colour on my paper. So I didn't want my card to be wishy-washy, I really wanted it to stand out, and that's why I've created quite a highly pigmented mix of paint. So you don't want to watch me paint the rest of this in. I'm going to speed this section of the video up for you. Okay, so as you can see, I've filled out my vehicle now and it's looking really nice and bright. I've actually done 2 coats of the red crimson on there, so it really stands out. Now I want to focus on the wheels. So as I showed you on my sample, here's the Payne's grey of the background, and we actually just want to mix a darker version, so that's less water and more paint to create this really dark grey now for the tyres. So with the small brush, so I'm using a number 2, you can see how small that the bristles are on that brush, because obviously these are quite small areas we're painting now. And my Payne's grey is the other side of my palette, so just switch that round for you quickly. So damp brush straight into the paint and straight onto the tyre. Now I don't mind if my tyres aren't perfectly round. You know, this is a hand painted Christmas card, so I'm happy if there's a few sort of little imperfections in this painting. I think it makes it look authentic and it gives it that handmade appeal. So, you know, don't be too hard on yourself if your wheel isn't quite perfect. Mine won't be. But I think, you know, it sort of looks sweet anyway. And exactly the same on the other wheel. Oh, that's quite a dark mix, just doing a touch more water. Now because I've got a puddle on my paper, dipping my brush, dabbing the tip of my brush on some paper towel. That way I won't flood my painting with too much paint. And that's controlled it again. So I did have a puddle there, so I had too much paint on my brush because I went into the water to thin it down. So these things happen all the time. Just take a deep breath, dab your bristles onto paper towel, and it removes a little bit of the paint, and then you get that control back. Okay, so again, I don't want it to be perfect, it just looks pretty sweet. Okay, lovely. So what's next? Let's have a look at the base of the tree. So we want to be painting a brown tree trunk. Now I didn't tell you this at the beginning, but I'm going to use a little bit of my burnt sienna, this is. I don't want it to be too dark. It's only a very, very small tree trunk, so we don't need a lot of paint. But just fill that in. Okay, so I'm using the small brush still, it gives me a little bit more control. That's looking good. So now my bumper is going to be pale grey. So let's mix up this Payne's grey here. Just going to add a little bit more. It's going to be a bit darker than the background, but not quite as dark as the wheels. So let's paint that in. a little bit of water. There we go. So this is the bumper, folks, in case you didn't notice what it was. It's a very, very simple drawing of a car, but I think it's quite fun. You could draw a little Mini, that would also look ever so sweet. You could play about with the colours, maybe blue would work nicely. I really like the theme of green and red at Christmas, so that's why I chose red for my car, but you can choose any colour that you want. I'm just going to thin the paint down a little further, so it's going to get a little bit more thin and lighter, as I just want to paint in some shadow in the wheel arch there, because that's bright white at the moment and it stands out too much. So just pale grey in there. Okay, lovely. And shall we brighten this up a little bit? Let's see, what can we do for the centre of the wheels? Let's take a little bit of the cadmium yellow, I think. So a tiny bit of cadmium yellow, which I've got on my, I don't think you can see, oh you can just see that, that's good. So just a little bit, want it nice and thin, I don't want it to stand out too much. I've got a hair on there which I don't want, there we go. If it's too bright, all you do is you clean off your brush, damp bristles, and you can lift some of that away. It was a little bit strong for me, and I'm going to do the same with the back wheel. Let's use a bit more of the water. Lighten that colour up a little bit, like that. Okay. And I think for the windows, again, let's just keep this really simple, folks. Let's just go with the light grey. Just to put a little bit of something on those windows. I think I might just keep it really simple and have just the tops painted. Yeah, that looks quite fun. I'm going to also use the cadmium yellow for the headlight on the front, and then clean that off again, and let's just use the crimson on the brake light at the back here. Oops, a little bit more water, it's a tiny bit dry. Brake light. I've just noticed that there's a gap down here, if you can see on screen, just here where I'm pointing the brush. That's where I didn't paint any background, so I'm going to make sure my brush has got all that red off. I'm just going to go into the pale grey that we've got mixed up and just paint that little white section there with the pale grey, just to fill that gap a little bit. Now let's have a look. That's looking great, but do you know what? I'm still not quite happy with the tree. So let's try something else. Let me see. Let's get. Have I got? Yeah. Right. So what I've picked up, guys, in another section of my studio, I've got a lot of acrylic brushes. So this is, look, you can see it's much stiffer, and I'm going to run it along. Let's just wet it a bit with a tiny bit of water, and I'm going to run it, dab it into my green, the sap green, and I'm just going to I need it slightly more wet. Let's just wet my bristles a little bit more than that. It wasn't coming off. So what I'm going to do is like a bit like a dry brush kind of technique. So just take off some excess on the paper towel. And I'm going to dab it down and create these marks just to give us some texture. And I've really got, it's nice and dark, so it's straight in there with only a small amount of water. I want to get some texture on here because it needs to look a bit more fun, not so flat. So I'm just working along the top edge. I'm dabbing it down onto the green that's already painted there. And I'm doing all different directions, so let me show you that on another piece of paper. So if you see here, I'm dabbing it in lots of different directions and overlapping them, and it creates a good mark. So I think that's working nicely. Apologies if this is shaking the camera a little bit. Sometimes when I tap down on the table it moves the camera, but you can probably still see how it's working. And yeah, that's looking much better. I really like that. I'm glad I tried that out. And I just want to let that dry now. I think I'm happy. Welcome back, everybody. It has now fully dried and I have carefully removed the masking tape from around the edge. Using the masking tape to help hold the paper down, especially when you're using a lot of watery washes, is a great tip. But it also gives us this really nice, crisp, clean edge around the painting. So, you know, it enhances the finishing quality, I think, as well. So, yeah, make sure you do use some tape. You'll find it'll stop the buckling, which can be a bit of an issue. Okay, so I think the salt has worked beautifully well in this one. We've got these gorgeous kind of granulations going on. They sort of look like little crystalline shapes, which I'm really, really pleased with. I think if I gave this as a Christmas card to somebody, one of my friends or family, I think they'd be really chuffed with that. The car stands out really nicely, and I'm really glad that we used that technique, the dabbing technique, with the stiffer flat brush in the end there, just to create texture on the Christmas tree. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed painting along with me, and I hope I've taught you something new and maybe that you can put in your tool belt and use in your own paintings. So don't forget, folks, give me a like, a thumbs up. I really appreciate that. I love to hear your comments and your feedback. Tell me what you've liked about this painting, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon as well if you want to see more of my videos in the future. So take care, everybody. I've been Rebecca Jarman. Don't forget that down in the description below this video you can download a PDF of the drawing. You'll also find links to my website and my Facebook. I have a Facebook group for people that follow my tutorials, so feel free to join that too. You can share your paintings, ask questions. I'd be happy to help you. Incidentally, if you have any questions about this tutorial, you can place a comment below this video. I reply to all the comments that you leave me. Take care, see you soon.